styles of Albert's day. Gretel smeared oil on his hair and dragged the brush through it over and over again until she sighed and dredged up a part with a wooden pick. Her efforts hardly made a difference. Albert knew that within an hour his unruly hair would be as wild as before. The maid was right. Albert's hair was impossible to tame. Albert looked at his older sister, Louisa, whose hair hung in two perfectly formed braids, just as it always did. "Now for the bow tie," Albert heard Gretel say as she reached around to loop a silk tie behind his neck. "Remember, your papa says you're old enough for church now, but you must sit quietly and watch what the others do. If they stand, you stand. If they sit, you sit. No daydreaming." Albert nodded. Almost every day Gretel and his mother told him to stop daydreaming, whether he was rocking his baby sister Emma's cradle or standing on a stool stirring a pot of lentils on the wood stove. Adele Schweitzer, Albert's mother, walked into the room and spoke to Louisa. "Mind you sit up straight and listen to every word your papa says, and make sure Albert does the same. I expect a good report from Gretel on the both of you." 5-year-old Louisa nodded. Even though the Lutheran church that Albert's father pastored was just a few doors from the Schweitzer home, Albert felt the thrill of a new adventure. He was finally old enough to go to a church service. Of course, he'd been there many times when the congregation wasn't present. His father, the Reverend Louis Schweitzer, often let Albert sit at the back of the church and listen as Father Iltis practiced the weekly hymns on the pipe organ in the loft above. Albert loved those times when the organ echoed off the stone walls and sunlight shone through the church's stained glass windows and danced on the floor. Albert waved to his mother as he stepped outside. Adele was staying home to look after the baby. Emma was sickly, and Adele often stayed indoors to watch her. His two other sisters, 2-year-old Marguerite and 3-year-old Adele, clung to their mother's long blue skirt. Albert smiled. He was finally going somewhere with Louisa and leaving his 3 younger sisters behind. Louisa took Albert's hand, and together they walked down the cobblestone street and up the slope to the church. A feeling of pride flooded Albert as he saw his father standing at the open door of the church, wearing his cassock and preaching bands. He smiled as he shook Albert's hands. "Be good in church and do what Gretel tells you to," he said. Albert and Louisa settled into a pew near the front, on the women's side of the church. Gretel slid in beside them. As the congregation stood to sing a hymn, Albert looked around and listened closely to the sound of the pipe organ. He'd heard Father Iltis play the instrument many times before, but there was something special in hearing the notes carry loud and clear above the congregation's singing. After the hymns had been sung, Albert's father climbed the stairs to the ornately carved pulpit that towered above the pews and began delivering the morning homily. He preached in German, though, like most of their neighbors, the Schweitzers spoke Alsatian at home and sometimes French. It had been like that since before Albert was born, and it seemed perfectly natural for him to understand and speak all 3 languages. Albert listened to the sermon for a few minutes and then turned his attention to the stained-glass windows. He'd overheard his father talking to his grandfather about how most Lutheran churches did not have such ornate windows. But the church in the village of Gunsbach, on the banks of the River Fecht, was different from others. It stood in the Alsace Valley, between the beautiful Vosges Mountains to the west and the Rhine River to the east. Once, when Albert found a piece of flint in the garden of their home, his father had explained that it was from Roman times, and that for over 1,000 years the Alsace Valley had been a battleground for control of the region. The stained-glass windows represented part of that struggle. In 1639, the French gained control of the Alsace region. Several years later, King Louis XIV of France, who was Catholic, decreed that the German-style Lutherans could stay in their church.